I've worked with men long enough to know this. Most affairs aren't uncovered by evidence, they're felt long before they're proven. Men sit across from me and say, I can't explain it, but something changed. Not her words, not her actions, her energy. And the mistake many men make is waiting for something obvious, a message, a confession, a mistake. I am Coach Janet, and today I want to slow this down, not to create suspicion, but to give language to something your intuition already understands. By the end of this video, you would understand the 3 ways unfaithful women hide their affairs. Before we dive in, quickly subscribe to this channel because you are going to be gaining a lot from my wealth of experience.
Number 1. The emotional cloak. When warmth becomes camouflage. One of the most misunderstood patterns I see in my work with men is what I call the emotional cloak. This is the woman who appears kind, attentive, even nurturing. Sometimes she becomes more affectionate than usual, more present, more reassuring. On the surface, everything looks fine, maybe even better. And that's why men often miss it. Psychologically, this behavior isn't manipulation in the cartoon sense, it's protection. Women who fear confrontation or exposure often compensate emotionally. They lean into warmth to stabilize the environment around them. The problem is, emotion doesn't run on intention alone. It runs on authenticity. And when emotional energy is divided, the body reveals it quietly. Men describe it in similar ways, even when they've never met each other. She was there, but not fully. It felt like she was performing closeness. Something in her presence felt slightly delayed. These aren't dramatic changes, they're micro-shifts. A pause before responding that wasn't there before, laughter that feels a half-second late, affection that's technically correct but emotionally thin. One man told me, she'd sit beside me, hold my hand, smile, but her eyes looked tired, like she was somewhere else. That's the trace. When warmth becomes strategic instead of spontaneous, it loses rhythm. The gestures remain, but the emotional timing changes. And men who are paying attention feel that mismatch long before they can explain it. What makes the emotional cloak so effective is that it plays against a man's decency. Men don't want to question kindness. They don't want to seem suspicious or insecure, so they explain the discomfort away. She's just tired. She's stressed. I'm probably overthinking. But intuition doesn't speak in full sentences. It speaks in sensations. And ignoring those sensations doesn't make them disappear, it just delays clarity. This isn't about accusing her of anything, it's about understanding that emotional attachment leaves fingerprints, even when behavior looks correct. Warmth used as cover still carries tension underneath. And when you learn to notice emotional rhythm instead of just emotional gestures, the confusion starts to lift.
Number 2. The social camouflage. How routines and people become cover. Another pattern I see often in my work with men is what I call social camouflage. This is where secrecy doesn't hide in emotions, but in everyday life. Friends, routines, public behavior, things that look harmless because they're familiar. Men usually describe it this way. She was always with friends. She had a routine. There was nothing secretive about it. And that's exactly why it works. Psychologically, social environments create credibility. When behavior is wrapped in social proof, suspicion feels unreasonable. A dinner with friends, a weekly outing, a new group activity, all of these sound normal. But patterns tell the truth long before explanations do. Social camouflage works by blending change into structure. The woman doesn't disappear, she reorganizes. She places distance inside activities that appear justified. One of the most important things I teach men is this. Behavior doesn't have to be hidden to be misleading. It only has to be predictable enough to stop questions. Men often overlook timing, not the event itself, but when it always happens. A new habit that consistently overlaps with your absence, a recurring outing that appears only when you're unavailable, a routine that didn't exist before, but now feels non-negotiable. On their own, these are nothing. Together, they form alignment. A man once told me his partner joined a weekly social group she'd never expressed interest in before. It sounded healthy, encouraging even. The meetings always fell during his longest work shift. At first, it meant nothing, until he realized the timing never changed, not once. Social camouflage doesn't rely on lying, it relies on assumption. The assumption that friends equals safety, that routine equals truth, that public behavior equals transparency. Another layer of this pattern is the use of friends themselves. Sometimes friends are aware, sometimes they aren't. But either way, they become part of the structure that makes secrecy easier. You know how she is with her friends. They've always gone out together. That's just her circle. What matters isn't whether friends are covering intentionally. What matters is that their presence reduces scrutiny. Men who notice this pattern don't do so because they're controlling. They notice because something no longer aligns. Stories change slightly. Details don't quite match. A friend's explanation sounds different each time. Small inconsistencies that don't trigger alarm, but create discomfort. And here's where many men get stuck. They feel the misalignment, but talk themselves out of it. I don't want to read too much into it. I don't want to seem insecure. But awareness is not accusation. Social camouflage leaves traces because life still has friction. Schedules overlap imperfectly. Stories require coordination, and coordination always produces seams. What I tell men is this: don't focus on catching contradictions, focus on noticing repetition. When behavior begins to cluster around convenience, when routines serve distance more than connection, when social activity expands while emotional availability contracts. These are not proofs, they are signals, and signals are meant to be noticed, not ignored. Social camouflage works best when men believe that nothing hidden could exist in plain sight. But human behavior doesn't disappear just because it's public. It simply adapts. And when you start paying attention to timing, alignment, and repetition instead of explanations, clarity begins forming quietly.
Before I delve into the digital mask, do me a personal favor by liking this video if you have gotten any value thus far. Number 3, the digital mask. Why technology never hides everything. The third pattern I see repeatedly in my work with men is what I call the digital mask. Technology creates the illusion of control. Messages can be timed. Apps can be hidden. Notifications can be managed. Entire conversations can exist without ever entering the physical space of the relationship. On the surface, it looks like the safest place to contain emotional or physical attachment. But behavior doesn't disappear just because it's digital. It reorganizes. The digital mask isn't about spying or invading privacy. It's about noticing how interaction patterns change. And in relationships, consistency matters far more than content. Men often say to me, "I never checked her phone." And they didn't need to. What shifted wasn't what was on the screen, it was how she interacted with it. Psychologically, when emotional energy moves toward a new attachment, communication becomes regulated. Responses stop being natural and start being managed. The body and mind work together to prevent emotional leakage. Reply times change. A woman who was once relaxed becomes precise. She delays responses that used to be immediate, or she replies quickly but without depth. The rhythm shifts. This isn't random, it's intentional self-control.
One man told me his partner stopped answering messages when he was nearby, not because she was hiding the phone, but because she didn't want her reactions observed. Emotional excitement shows up in facial expression and posture before it shows up in words. That's something many men don't realize. The body reveals attachment before language does. Another signal that often appears is selective visibility. Social media becomes curated. Certain people appear more frequently. Certain moments are highlighted while others quietly disappear. It's not about secrecy, it's about shaping perception. The goal isn't to hide everything, it's to show just enough to appear transparent. But curation always creates inconsistencies. Photos that don't align with her schedule, posts that suggest presence where time says otherwise, the same individual appearing repeatedly in moments that don't fit her usual routine. Men often dismiss this because it feels too subtle to matter, but subtle is exactly where emotional reorganization shows up first. Then there's over-control, deleting histories, guarding devices more closely than before, turning screens away, changing passwords without explanation. These behaviors aren't proof of wrongdoing, but sudden precision is rarely meaningless. Psychologically, over-control signals anticipation of exposure. When privacy escalates quickly, it's often compensating for vulnerability. The more someone feels emotionally exposed elsewhere, the more carefully they manage access at home. A man once shared that his partner always stepped into another room to use her phone. She wasn't frantic, she wasn't defensive, she was simply consistent. When he asked casually, she brushed it off. Later, he discovered she had been maintaining a separate communication space he didn't know existed. What mattered wasn't the app, it was the pattern. The digital mask fails because humans are creatures of habit, and when habits change without explanation, the change itself becomes information. Technology doesn't erase emotional shifts, it records them indirectly, through timing, through repetition, through behavior that becomes unusually managed. And this is where many men regain their footing. When men stop searching for proof and start noticing patterns, confusion begins to lift, not because everything becomes clear all at once, but because they stop dismissing what they already feel. That's the real danger of the digital mask. It convinces men that if they don't see evidence, nothing has changed. But emotional reality doesn't require confirmation to exist. Awareness isn't about confrontation, it's about clarity. Seeing behavior as information rather than justification allows you to stay grounded instead of reactive, calm instead of anxious, observant instead of accusatory. And when you operate from clarity, you stop arguing with your own intuition. That's the point. If this helped you put language to something you've been sensing but couldn't explain, you're not alone. Awareness brings calm, not conflict. Share your thoughts in the comments if you want, and if this kind of grounded insight helps, subscribe for more.